Today, my guest is Maria de Dio, and she is an author and a speaker who is recently releasing a children's series of books about adoption. So, welcome, Anna Maria. I'm so excited to have you here today and talk about this topic that gets left out a little bit here. And I want to bring some light to adoption and what your process was. So, I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, can you start by maybe telling us about your own loss story and what led you to adopting?
Sure. Well, as with many adoption stories, mine began with infertility. So I was married and we started on the trying path. And it took about a year or so, but finally was pregnant. But then the first baby loss happened and it revealed, some infertility issues. So we started down on that path, but just because it was so unexpected, I'm very healthy. I thought everything was going fine. And the marriage was just not in that great shape. So the miscarriage started really the process of, is this the right path for me? So, that led to a divorce and then a remarriage, but the infertility issues, did not go away. So we started down on that path again. And that took probably another, well, this was several years later. So then after married the second time, about 2 years later, we did have a beautiful baby girl, but there was another miscarriage in that process. So I was kind of familiar with what it was going to take to get pregnant again and started that process again. And then kind of a third baby loss. There was the message, I was getting older and if I was to have the family, if we were to have the family that we really wanted, we looked at a lot of alternatives and decided that adoption was the way to go. So that's how we arrived at it. But all in all, from that first baby loss to having a child of our own, that was 10 years.
Oh,
So it's hard to kind of describe that, journey in any succinct way, except it was just, fraught with such emotions and ups and downs and periods of depression. And the kind of, you think that you're the only one going through it. So, each month, you're waiting with that anticipation and hope. And so, and kind of coming to that, having our baby girl and then deciding to go through the route to adoption. And then the course that we chose, international adoption. And anyway, it was just happenstance that we picked international adoption. So I started to write about
yeah.
it.
Well, there's so many things I think too in what you just said about having that miscarriage, realizing that maybe this marriage isn't going to withstand anything else after this crisis. Going through divorce, remarriage, like that's a lot of heavy emotional things within a 10-year period. How did you deal with all of that?
You know, in the course of my just recently, have you ever heard of strength binders?
I have,
Take this
yes.
inventory and I've taken that, many times actually in my corporate life and my personal life, just to kind of, I've belonged to a lot of groups, do nonprofit volunteering. And so I've had that inventory a couple of times. And it's so funny that you say that. My number one strength is focus. And I think that I was just able to, what do I need to do? Day in and day out, because those things shift. But what do I need to do, this month, the next month? And each month kind of revealed the decision. Some months, you couldn't take the infertility drugs. Some month, when we decided to adopt, that was a 2-year process. Internationally, background checks, fingerprints, psychological assessments. So that during those 10 years, you had to take it piece by piece. That's the only answer I can really provide.
Yeah, no, that makes
Okay.
sense. I love that focus because you just you were so willing to just be like, "This is what I want. This is the kind of family I envision myself with," and it came about in such an unconventional way, but how beautiful that you did. You were able to achieve the family you wanted.
I think a lot of what perhaps maybe your listeners can even identify with is that call to be a mother. I mean, it sounds like cheesy when you say it. Oh, I want to be, but it was so strong. I just did not want to give up. And then, but there are realities that you have to acknowledge, getting older, what your body can do, what your body can't do. And the fact that the second time around, I had a partner that really was through it with me thick and thin is another, blessing and wonderful thing.
That's amazing, yes. And your tenacity to just keep going. Because I'm sure I know infertility treatments are grueling and expensive and so emotional, and then I can't even imagine what an adoption must be like, and I can't wait to hear your story about your story of adoption. I think our listeners definitely will identify with your desire to be a mother at any whatever it takes.
Yes.
That's what we want.
What it amounted to. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when you decided on adoption, what were the options and how did you decide on the one you went with?
Well, we went down a couple of roads initially. Domestic proved to be a very big hurdle. And then I looked into several international solutions, alternatives. And we went with one or two agencies, one that went out of business and one that just didn't respond to our inquiry. It was just really a mix. And one day I happened to see an article in the newspaper that uh, a dozen or so children from Mexico were at a local church summer camp. And these children are eligible for adoption. Well, by that point, our daughter was 7 years old, 6 or 7 years old. And I thought it kind of dawned on me like a lightning bolt. The time for an infant really was past. So I thought, well, what is the best sibling? These children were all from age, it looked like 4 to 8 kind of thing. And I thought, why don't I look into this? And I just, again, focused, went off like gangbusters and contacted them. And my husband and I met with the agency that handled the adoptions, and we were off in that, again, a 2-year process. And it entailed a visit to Mexico 3 times. And, the second time was to meet a child that had been selected for us. And then the third time to kind of finalize it. So it was really uh, quite a journey. And that's what inspired me to write. I don't know if you can see my book. It's called
Yes.
Love at the Border, Adoption Adventure. And it was again, such a journey from beginning to end. I thought that I wanted to write about it and talk to other mothers and families about that and love the whole process.
Oh my gosh. How many children are adopted from out of the country compared to domestic?
Yeah,
Do you know?
that number's been falling consistently.
Is it? Yeah.
International, yes, because of, I'm sure you can imagine, there's been, corrupt practices found in several countries, and then just domestic adoption for a lot of reasons is the most prevalent form of adoption because of family situations and relatives adopting relatives. So it's just much more common. But
Yeah.
at the time, we chose this international route. And now, many, many years later, some of our friends have said to us, we thought you were absolutely nuts.
Right? Yes.
And it is, and now I even look at my husband and I say, what did you think when I said,
How did we yeah. How did we dare?
why did we do that? And it's so funny. And even at the time, going through, and we can talk about adoption, And when my daughter when she spoke English, she said, "Why did you?" And this was part of her transition. "You adopt me if you didn't even speak Spanish." And so, again, we can talk about what
Yeah.
present in every adoption, but that was her take on the situation. You're a fool.
So how old was she when you got her, when it was final?
Um, when we met her, she was 6,
Okay.
and
Nice.
then it took a year, and then she came to live with us just before her 7th birthday.
My gosh. So you had a 7-year-old
Right. So
that's your
overall,
biological child. You were able to have your biological daughter, and then you have w so they're about a year or 2
yes,
different?
you're apart, but 2 years apart in school. So
Okay. So 2 grades apart in school. So what are the differences of becoming a mother biologically versus to an adoptive child?
well, I mean, so many answers there. I mean, to be fair, I guess the maybe a short answer is that I did not realize that the depth of her trauma and her loss. I mean, that's
Mhm.
really the biggest lesson learned in the book. So all adoption begins with trauma, separation, and loss. But all I could think about was, isn't this wonderful? We're going to have the family that we always wanted. And of course, everyone was saying to me, "Oh, she's so lucky to have you and my husband as a family, and her adorable daughter. Isn't that wonderful?" And that's really the last thing. I knew that was not the last thing my adopted daughter wanted to hear was that she was so lucky because,
Right.
in a blank, here she was living in Cuernavaca, Mexico, just a beautiful town, and the very next day, she's in suburban Philadelphia, like going in a room by herself. So she lived again, to be fair, at the orphanage, the women that cared for the children were called tias. And she had the most loving, wonderful tia. The director of the orphanage was just this wonderful, charismatic person that is so talented with children, and her vision for really changing the way children were cared for in Mexico. And so she lost that. She lost her the food, the smells,
Yeah.
everything. And that was not dawning on me. And it took really a long time just to kind of pull all that together and help her cope. And so again, that was the reason, just beginning to write all this down in a book to kind of chronicle our journey and how we overcame and dealt with these issues.
Yeah. Yeah, so many things because for you, you're thinking, "Okay, great. This is the light at the end of the tunnel. This is exactly what we've been
Right.
hoping
Right.
for."
I'm done.
Right.
Yeah.
But it
So
was just the beginning, I'm sure. Especially getting her at that age where she did have her language and she did have her culture, and yeah, I'm sure it was very challenging at times to maybe was it challenging to bond with her?
yes, yes.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
I I just loved her to pieces and wanted just to squeeze her and hug her, and she was having none of it. Just
Oh,
none of
okay.
it. And it was she cried for months. I mean, it
Oh,
was
wow.
even at school. And just one quick story is that when she first started school, back to school night has those nights where you go to school and you see the kids' projects and they're hanging on poster boards in the hallway. And so her art project was to draw a picture of someone who was very important to you.
Mm.
And so here I am, I'm like skipping down the hallway thinking, oh, I can't wait. Oh, I'm going to see a big picture of myself, you know. So I get to her drawing, and it's of this blonde woman that's holding a baby. Like, what in who? And I could see her name at the bottom of the poster board. Yeah, that's hers, but who? So I said to her, "Who is this?" But a couple weeks, months, she was extremely resilient and, of course, was learning English and could understand English very quickly. And she said, "Well, that's my teacher. It's my teacher. She had a baby. My teacher had a baby, and she let me hold that baby. And I love my teachers." And I thought, well, wake up, Mama. She is not. She's telling you that you're not so great. And these things took years, really.
Mm,
So it
I'm
was long lesson learned about again
sure.
trauma and loss and helping her to cope.
And what a lesson too for your older daughter.
Well, that was another story because she was
Yeah.
an only child for all those years.
Yeah.
She had a couple moments of just complete meltdown. She's getting all the attention.
Yeah.
And she was because it was.
Yes, I'm sure there was a lot of attention that needed to go to her to acclimate her and make her feel comfortable and included, and yeah, and here she's been it for 7 years. Are they close now?
They are such completely different personalities you
Mhm.
cannot imagine. So it's happening. Again,
Yeah,
it's slowly. It's just happening.
still
I
a
think
process.
these things are, they're getting older. They are older. They're older women out in the world now, and they're having a little bit more in common, but it's still very challenging.
Yeah. Yeah, different worlds. So, tell us about your books, your children's series.
So, well, yes. Well, thanks for asking that. So this is what after this experiences.
Yeah.
Things in my Love at the Border book. I love to tell all the little stories about our family growing up together, and it's just some of them are hilarious when they were both in the Annie play. So,
Oh, yes.
and
Yeah.
my older biological child was Annie in the play. So it's just anyway, all these funny stories and our lives together. But as time went on and I finished the book and I retired from corporate life, this is what I'm so passionate about, having parents engage their adopted children in these conversations. So I thought, what is the best way to do that? And I started to write children's books focusing on messages that would open the conversation for adopted children and parents.
Mhm.
And so the second book, and the books are not about my family because my girls would kill me if I wrote any more about them. They're like, okay, Mom, that's enough.
Enough. Yeah.
TMI. So this is about a family very similar to ours, but an internationally adopted child who loses culture and sights and smells and a caregiver and what happens in that transition. In the second book, it's called How I Wonder Where You Are. And even though, the environment for that child to be adopted was loving, coming into a new situation, I mean, it doesn't erase the pain of the family that she never knew. Where did I come from? Who do I look like? Those questions are asked it, mentally, internally by many adopted children, and
Yeah.
they should be. That the pain kind of never goes away, and this is what I'd like to have, as I said, conversation open between children and parents. That it's okay, and their love is a wonderful thing, but there is that component of wonder out there, and that's what I'm trying to convey. So the third book is about to be released and or coming up. So I hope that the series will continue.
Does that one have a name yet?
Yes, this one, the third book is called Carla the Conqueror.
Ooh.
Carla,
Okay.
the young girl's name is Carla, and she has a school anxiety about reading aloud. So in families where perhaps English is not the first language, when children are asked to read books or read stories, read aloud, there's a tremendous amount of anxiety. And how do we help children overcome that and become more confident in a school setting.
That's great. I love it. Did you so what did you do as an adoptive mom to keep her culture alive?
Well, first, we have never lost contact with the women who raised her in the orphanage.
Mm.
So, I mean, funny story, as it turned out, my older daughter, our biological child, had the chance to work at the orphanage when she was in college. And we went back and had the reunion, which was very emotional.
Oh,
Oh my
yeah.
goodness.
Oh, that gives me the chills. Yes, for
So
sure.
we went back and did that. But prior to that, my daughter had begun to contact children via Facebook. Isn't that interesting? So she was on a journey to reclaim her Spanish and started to make things adjustments. Of course, taking Spanish in middle school and in high school. And so I think the sound started to come back to her. So she started to connect with folks. And so we went there, had the reunion. And so she's kept in touch. Then, as a college student, she had a semester abroad in Mexico and has
Mhm.
kept in touch. But, day to day, cooking recipes and stories and staying in touch helped.
Wow. That's amazing. What do you wanna say to a lost mama who's thinking, I can't go through infertility treatments anymore. I don't wanna be pregnant again. It's too stressful. I'm thinking about adopting. What would your advice be for someone who is kind of in that thought process of like, I wonder if I should adopt?
Well, your best friend is information. So I always tell folks to connect with other couples or families that have adopted.
Yeah.
That through those, stories, ask a lot of questions, do your research. There's so much more out there now in terms of how tos and things to know, memoirs, and just the experience, and that will really inform your opinion. And it may not be right for everyone, but
Mhm.
it's certainly the information certainly sets the stage for your this decision. Do you want to go ahead with it? Because it is a huge commitment, a lifetime commitment, and you have to be sure.
Yeah. As sure as you can be,
And
which I
sure.
suppose which I suppose goes in pregnancy as well, right? None of us are guaranteed what will happen or
Exactly.
yeah. What do you see for the future of the your books and your writing and your experience of being a biological and adoptive mom? What are your hopes for people?
Well, I'd like to be able to, and this is hence the podcast. And thank you again for having me. I'd like to be able to, expand this message and keep proclaiming this message about, trauma and loss as much as I can, and perhaps expand it to foster children as well. I think that they are a group that, does not have much support. We don't think that much about foster children. And that'll be the next series of books that I write about some foster situations. So I'm meeting with families now and talking to folks and seeing, what would be a good way to, again, provide a basis for conversation and understanding about the foster child relationship.
It just when you were saying that, it made me think you must have learned so many lessons on the fly, of course, about how to integrate a completely different child who's come from a whole different world basically into your family. I can't imagine the learning and the sense of just being the flexibility that must have to go with that.
Right. But, as I said in the beginning, I thought I knew it all, but
Yeah.
it was quickly, brought to reality. And it really, it does force a lot of self-examination. And again, more research. Did I research things fully? I thought I did. I,
Yeah.
as part of some of the agencies that we had applied to, there were reading requirements and training requirements, and you do all those things. But until you're experiencing it and really, uh, having to face the reality of it every day, uh,
Yeah.
not fully aware of some of these lessons. And some days there were many challenges, but
And I think it is one of those things, even if you think that your life is going exactly as planned, there are so many things that you don't know about, and there's so many lessons no matter what.
right. And, back to baby loss too. I mean, it was just, you had to be forgiving of yourself too. I was just so jealous of others that had
Mm.
children. And it was a side of me that I was surprising. Those were tough years.
Jealousy is a big one. That's a tough one to overcome because you do see it seems like everyone around you is getting what they want, and seems very effortless
Right. Through no,
sometimes, and yeah, that jealousy is tough to overcome during those times. Can people find out more about you and find your books?
well, a lot of information about me, again, as I mentioned, the real passion for me is the children's books to open up conversations and kind of make it okay to talk about the trauma, the loss, the separation, adoption grief, sometimes referred to as disenfranchised grief,
Mhm.
um, and through my children's books. So the books and all the information about me are on my website, which is my name, amddo.com, AnnaMariaDidio.com, amddo.com. And my writings are there, some other resources that we use for our family, information about my books. So that's really all the information.
That's a great place to look, and I'll definitely link that in the show notes, so that'll be easy to find you. What's one last thing, if there's anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like baby loss mamas to know?
Well, like I said, whatever stage you're in the journey, and at various points in my journey. Again, it sounds so cheesy, but it's you sometimes you just don't have all the answers. And other than networking and connecting to other adoptive parents, I connected with professionals, therapists, and those that were familiar with, baby loss, adoption of children that were of a certain age. And then as my daughter grew, struggles as a teenager. So always give that opportunity to talk to someone or have your child talk to someone that is not you. Or um, so that was important for me. So networking with
Great
other adoptive
advice.
parents and then reaching out to professionals.
That's great advice. We're not meant to do any of this alone, are we?
Now,
No matter
it
what.
really helps. Yeah, the isolation can be really terrible.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming here and sharing your story, and your books are incredible, and I love that you are willing to share this journey because it's been a challenging one, I'm sure. So, I love that you're able to share it with others and bring light to some of these topics that kids are really facing right now. There's a lot of different topics, and the more we can make them aware at a young age, the better off we all are. So,
Thank you for highlighting. I mean, the baby loss, that was really the beginning of where we ended up. So
yeah.
that's important to put a light on that as well, and help those women. So thank you.
Yes.